So one thing is that with news, with Google News and top stories, originally I felt that that might not be as impacted with the AIO side of things because it's so time sensitive, and Google might also have been concerned with accuracy issues and things like that. So how has your approach to Google News top stories optimization changed, or has it stayed the same? Yeah, and how do you approach it at the Telegraph?
So Google News, i.e. the Google News tab specifically, for most publishers is a pretty small chunk of how much you get. And we don't get, obviously we don't get direct top stories data from Google. But we do track top stories. We track it, particularly for big events. We run a Python script scraping every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. We have one that runs consistently just to say, here's the 100 entities we normally care about, so that we have an idea of how we're doing across the course of a month. And so we'll have that. We don't do much for Google News really, just because it's a relatively small proportion. But top stories, when Google launched AI overviews, they said that there won't be any cross-contamination between top stories and AI overviews, which is broadly true. What they do, I think, is if you had a trend graph of an entity, a topic, a story going up, once it hits a point of saturation, it starts to go back down. At some point on the downward slope, an AI overview will be introduced to say, here's what happened, pretty much. So you don't get any for real-time news, I suspect, just because they are a bit concerned about the accuracy of stuff, and as they should be. So our approach to it has, a few years ago, probably slightly more, you could kind of just stick the entity at the front of the story, do some clever headline optimization, tweak a couple of things, get loads of traffic. I think that's harder to do because most people know that now. So what we try and do is we do have quite a real-time view, try to take quite a real-time view of what's happening. We will try to have, when a story breaks, it's a big story, you try and have a pretty clear breakdown of how people will search, what they'll search for. You try to give a pretty clear summation to whichever desk is working on it to say, this is what we recommend doing for search. Here's the headline for the main one. If you're doing a live blog, here's what we'd recommend. Can we get more value out of a video or a gallery page? Try and optimize it to cater to user demand as much as you can and to increase your publishing volumes around that topic. But for us, we don't have we can't tell people what to do. It's basically just, here's what we think you should do. Take the advice, don't take the advice. But going up and speaking to people will always be better in a newsroom than emailing somebody. Both good, but got to get up there. You've got to speak to people.
Very interesting. I had a football blog many years ago, and the process I had to go through, I think it was 2011-12. It was the Google Publisher Center. Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had to go through that, and I had a news sitemap. So from a tech side, I had this, and I remember it was great at the day because you have a tiny blog and you're competing with the likes of the Telegraph, the Sun, or the Guardian, or whoever it was at the time. And I remember my site was brought down by me writing about Robin van Persie signing for Man United from Arsenal, and the amount of traffic that you would get at that
that's
was
very
just
cool.
insane. But that's obviously many years ago, and I believe Google had changed that there's no longer a Google Publisher Center that you need to go through. So if somebody has is a publisher and they aren't getting much top stories traffic, rather than the content side for now, we will get onto that, but from a tech setup, what is needed to be eligible for top stories, should I say?
So obviously the Publisher Center still exists, but they basically say you don't have to do it anymore. We just pick you now, which I think makes it harder for people to have, obviously the black box gets a bit blacker. A Google News XML sitemap will always be very, very valuable. If we're talking from a technical standpoint, obviously what you're going to need is a fast site, an efficient site, but they really want, again, once it's indexed and once you're up there, outside of having a Google News sitemap, a fast site, so you want the homepage with a number of links on it, you want your core content, you want it to be indexed quickly. You don't have to do that much. I would say at this point, there's nothing specific that you need to do for top stories that I could think of. Even a Google News sitemap, you don't necessarily have to do, but you'd be pretty stupid not to. It's a very good way of discovering content. It's also a very good way of finding out exactly what your competitors publish and when, which is always very useful. So that's nice. But you don't have to really, I would say it comes down to a kind of publishing volume and impact side of things, which is why I think you have to work hard to, and I know this is a bit more content-y, but it probably leads on, it's sort of a hybrid between the technical and the content side, but you really have to make your assets and your content sweat. So I think like you said, if you've done a live blog, do you have videos still on the live blog? Should that be a standalone video page? Should you also be creating a gallery page of the images from this? Should you be harnessing a specific story that comes off the back of what's happening, you have to be quite canny. And I think realistically, unless you can hit certain publishing volumes, it's probably not a sensible move to say, this is our goal, we just want top stories. It's like, you're probably going to have more success if you were going a bit harder on YouTube, as an example of something that you might do. So you got to figure out what's going to be good for you and your audience. And it's unlikely that, if you're publishing 4 articles a day, I'm not sure you've got much of a chance in top stories for anything other than the lowest of the low things when it comes to competition, which might not have a top stories box.
So with the publishing rate is really interesting. And how do you go about understanding what the optimal number of pages you should be publishing on a daily basis?
I think that's a really good question. I think your first step is to understand how much your competition are publishing. Obviously, all things being equal, if you publish more, everything else being the same, you probably do better. So that's probably your best starting point, is to figure out like where you sit in the grand scheme of things. Been a lot of chat recently around some Indian publications who started to do pretty well in like the States and in the UK, and you started to see, I can't remember, Hindustan Times. There was a period last year where they were doing really well, and everyone was like, what are they doing? And we when we were tracking everybody's publishing volumes, they were doing something crazy, like 40,000 a month or something like that. And it was like a wild number. And then when we did a little bit of digging, it was basically like on their website, their CEO was even like, yeah, we just write everything with AI. It's great. So obviously they've had a bit of a fall from grace, have had most of these publishers, and it's not a them fault really. It's like more of a Google problem. But I think what you have to do is just find out where you sit in the ecosystem. If you're doing 5 articles a day and your competition is doing 100, you're probably not going to win there, particularly if they're more established. But if you're in a niche where publishing volumes are relatively low, you've obviously got more of a shot if you're relatively low as well. So I think that's your best option, just to figure out where you sit in the grand scheme of things.
And last question on the technical setup with schema and news article. Do you see that as having a big impact in terms of performance?
So we had some long-standing issues with our structured data a couple of years ago. We moved to JSON schema recently. We originally had microdata, and what we wanted to do was, we should move away from this. It's really difficult for people it's much more complicated for people to go in and make changes and make like improvements to hard-coded microdata to page templates than a JSON level page template markup. We changed our live blog schema. We moved to news article schema for all of our news articles, which obviously is a very sensible thing to do. I don't think this is I think for the majority of people, these things are rarely kind of make or break kind of things. They're sort of like good things to do, nice to haves. You should absolutely be doing them, but it's probably not the reason why your content isn't doing particularly well. So that's, I think, generally a good way of framing that stuff. And we had almost a year's worth of pain in the arse around, we changed our live blog schema. We actually improved it, and so that we never understood what happened. But when we changed it and moved to a new JSON format, we lost the red live badge for our live blogs when it was coming up in top stories, which is completely driven by the structured data. And for months, Svet and I were looking at stuff being like, we cannot understand why this has happened. And eventually we moved back to the shitty old markup, and it came back again. And then we were like, okay, don't touch it. Don't touch anything. This is just where we live now with this. But very, 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 one of the most important things I think for news generally is just freshness. The accuracy of your published date, your updated date, consistency across your structured data, your on-page dates, Google News sitemap, every possible area where a wrong date could be pulled through is crucial. And again, this probably is a make or break thing, but if much of your content or a lot of your content is being rendered on the client side and not the server side, then that's a significant problem for news, because everything gets, there'd be in terms of the crawling phases, once something crawled, it might not be crawled again for minutes, hours, whatever it might be. So once it's kind of out there, I think Barry speaks about it's more important to be right than first. And I think that's kind of broadly right. Speed is really important. But actually, if you push something out wrong, you have inaccuracies. If you have things that are just, once you change them, they might not get re-picked up again. So it's really important that what you do first is really good. So structured data and server-side rendering dates are massively, as a combination of things, particularly server-side rendering versus client-side, massively important for news and freshness and Google being able to pick things up and crawl it efficiently and effectively.
100%. I know that's great advice. And authorship as well, I guess, having a clear author for your EAT signals and all of that.
Yeah. Again, all stuff that lots of these things are hard to definitively say. It's always how long is a bit of string, but broadly people want to know, like we know this, Rob, they want to know who has written an article and who this person is and why they should trust them. So even if you just go, I don't care if it's a smart thing to do for search. Obviously it is. The internet is, there's the sort of, I think one of the key things over the next few years will be the kind of the disambiguation of people and services and everything about who is this person, how accurately can an algorithm track them across everything they've ever done. I think it doesn't really matter if you have the best author in the world. If there's no tracing of who that person is on the internet and you don't make it pretty clear of their digital footprint, you're probably not in as good a position as somebody with a much worse author, but actually who you can trace and all the people know who they are. That's always a good trust signal, I would say.
Yeah, that was really good advice. And the last point I'll say with news, and I guess hope this doesn't happen so much now, but you had a time where it was like there's not maybe the content you guys would produce, but like best something 2017, and then it's like, well, let's just change the date and add a change tiny bit at the start, and then that's fine, right? Like, how much? I assume the editing process is still a massive part of what you do, obviously, to be factually correct. But if there's an update in story or an update in piece with stuff, it's never you just publish it and then you forget about it. But how important is that editing process, and how much do you have to change to have an impact?
It's a very, very important part of the update itself, and I suppose generally like the quality of what we're doing. And if you ask the legal team, they would say, well, you can't update something. You can't just update something. There needs to be a substantial enough change, which would always be our general advice anyway. With something like news, challenging because there is just constant update. You push a file out, there's a spelling mistake. You put so those pages are might be updated 10, 20 times when they go out if they're done quickly, which might not be perfect, but c'est la vie. It's better than not doing it. For a more evergreen type of article, we try and figure out when and how frequently these things should be updated. Like, when does search interest peak for a specific topic? In travel, when do people care about going to Spain or whatever? Like, obviously all year round, but when should stuff be updated by? And then from our end, it's always, what should we be adding? Has the search intent changed? Search intent for best article probably doesn't change too much, but at the same time, what we're saying is like, what can we be adding here to help us stand out? Not only with subscription paper, but we need to add something to the wider, glut of information that's out there about this topic. These things have been done hundreds, thousands of times already. Like, what can we add? So we always try and make sure that we add something that isn't out there or is very difficult to copy. You can't do that with everything. It's just not these people have targets, publishing volume targets. We can't say every piece of article has to have something brilliant. We try and be canny with those